afternoon and welcome back to our show. In today's segment, we will discuss a threat to humanity that many of us are still ignoring. A female in her 70s had just died from an infection caused by carbapenem-resistant Enterobacteriaceae, a bacteria that is resistant to all kinds of antibiotics. It is very likely that this bacteria can infect any one of us, no matter how rich, poor you are, no matter where you live. This is real and this is happening. Today we have with us Mr. McKimbey, a famous economist. Mr. McKimbey, academics have related this issue to a tragedy of the commons situation. Could you please explain what that means?
The tragedy of the commons is a philosophy that was first explored by the economist William Forster Lloyd. Villagers at the time shared common resources, such as common grazing land. His hypothesis was that each individual farmer would have in their best interest to add more cows to their herd, to make more money. But since all farmers are rational and would like to add more cows to their field, overgrazing would occur. At that point, all farmers would not be able to keep their cows and everyone would be worse off. So in theory, when making decisions, people of course act in their own interests, avoiding the damage overall to the society in which they're in. So common resources can be easily overused.
That's really interesting. Let's look at how this applies to the antibiotic crisis. A renowned medical is here with us today, researching this tragedy. Mrs. Schlumber.
So, well, simply put, the antibiotic crisis can be perceived as a tragedy of the commons because people are doing what's best for them in the short term without taking into account what's best for society as a whole in the long term. So, for instance, people are using antibiotics when they don't have an infection, or animals are being fed antibiotics when it's not necessary. And this way, the resistant bacteria are spreading and mutating through natural selection because the non-resistant ones are being killed off by the antibiotics and the other ones are surviving and spreading.
Since we are aware of these terrible effects, why have we not reduced our consumption of antibiotics?
So let's think about it for a second. You wake up with a really sore throat and you have an important show coming up. You know that you have a pack of antibiotics left at home from the last time you were sick. What would you do? Chances are you would take those antibiotics even though you're not sure you have an infection and antibiotics are required. This growing resistance to antibiotics has a huge impact on mortality rates, and European researchers estimated that more than 33,000 people die per year due to antibiotic-resistant bacteria infection. A government commission report estimated that if nothing changed, by 2050, death could rise to 10 million a year globally.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Schlumber. Those are truly terrifying numbers. And going back to Mr. McKimbey, how does this tragedy impact our economy?
Indeed, more people are getting infections that cannot be healed and are lasting longer, resulting in an increase in sick days being taken, impacting on firms and costing up to £77 billion a year to British firms, not re-injected in the economy. Additionally, there's an incremental cost of research for governments.
Could you illustrate your theory a bit more, please?
Of course, here's a graphic illustration. Meet Joe. He's feeling unwell this morning. After calling his friend GP, he believes he has some kind of stomach infection. From his friend, he knows that an antibiotic is accessible in his local pharmacy without the need for a prescription. So he has two options: A, take the antibiotics, or B, not to take them. But Joe isn't the only person to consider here. Every other member in the game, the society, also needs to make decisions. A, continue to use antibiotics, or B, moderate the use of antibiotics. Outbreak of super gonorrhea. And using antibiotics gives Joe a higher payoff than not using them, as not only is he cured in the short run, but also benefits from lack of antibiotic resistance in society too, seeing as society is moderating antibiotic use, resulting in a larger benefit of +10. But this has the cost of every other member of society being worse off due to the gradual accumulation of antibiotic resistance in the population, -5, caused by one additional person using antibiotics. The benefits of the individual do not outweigh the sum costs of the players. Therefore, the group as a whole suffers in the long run, despite individual short-run benefits. Despite the cost to the group, choosing the selfish choice is a dominant strategy, since each individual is always better off choosing the selfish strategy. They want to be cured. Therefore, if Joe, the individual, were to theoretically choose to abstain from antibiotics, this would result in an incremental gain to society in the long run, seeing as the risk of antibiotic resistance developing would be slightly lower, a benefit of +5 to society. However, this comes at the cost of the individual not recovering as quickly in the short run, -10 to Joe. If he doesn't use antibiotics, but society does, not only is he missing out on treatment himself, but he's also suffering the bad effects of antibiotic resistance that society is causing, hence a larger negative payoff. A longer-term perspective. Although not taking antibiotics may affect Joe in the short run, for example -10, in the long run, they gain a potential benefit, adding an additional +5 to total -5. Universal moderate use of antibiotics means the development of superbug strains is less and less likely. Thus, the individual and every other member of society has less risk of contracting such disease in the future, creating a healthier society in the long run, +35. Our body's natural resistance to such diseases will also increase, providing future benefits. Another long-term perspective, continued selection of the dominant strategy by both Joe and society over a long period of time drastically increases the likelihood of resistant strains developing. Although Joe may gain the short-term benefit of +5 for being treated, in the long term both he and society will experience the extreme negative consequences of bacterial resistance, falling fatally ill to even weak forms of infections, -35. This is the tragedy of the commons. The whole society is now subjected to the threat of highly resistant diseases. As such, doctors must restrict the amount of antibiotics they give out in order to prevent the creation of resistant strains and thus maximise the effectiveness of antibiotics. This payoff matrix summarises the decisions able to be made. The tragedy of the commons occurs when both the individual and society defect, because the individual payoffs outweigh the negative externality spread over society. Assuming utilities can be added, this is the total net effect in the society. Clearly both parties defecting leads to a worse outcome overall in the long run. It is important to highlight that the defect option that would prevail in society without external regulation is not technically speaking a Nash equilibrium, but rather a challenge of cooperation. It is a strategy that is witnessed until all societal resources are depleted, i.e. we can no longer use antibiotics to defend against diseases. The lack of applicability of a Nash equilibrium means that we must model to greater complexity the strategies we need to ensure resource sustainability. In short, a simple fix is not enough.
Thank you for this illustration. Now we will jump to our reporter Julia, who's in China right now. Julia, how's the situation over there?
The problem of diminished effectiveness of antibiotics is particularly acute in China, mainly due to the widespread misuse. In economics, such a phenomenon would be called negative externality for antimicrobial use. What it means is that at national level, governments like China mostly pay attention to domestic problems, while considering the externalities imposed on other countries. Thus, most countries do not have real policies for such a serious issue as antibiotic resistance, since the benefits from antibiotics consumption are instant and local. A recent study showed that in China in 2013, around 93,000 tons of antibiotics were consumed, 48% of which were consumed by humans, with the remaining by livestock. To compare China with other countries, the usage in China exceeds the usage of antibiotics in the UK by 6 times. The most known and dangerous example of multi-drug resistance bacteria, or superbugs, bacteria resistant to several different antibiotics, is colistin resistance reported in China in 2015. Farming animals involves large and densely managed herds. Therefore, it is highly likely for infectious disease to emerge and spread in such conditions. Antibiotics, such as colistin, are casually used by farmers in low dosage to manage the risk and provide meat at low costs. It is now, however, being seen to cause infections in other countries. It is important to note that colistin is the last-line type of strong drug against certain lethal microbes. Preventing such negligent behavior would be difficult and costly. Although over the last few decades China released a set of regulations to reduce the rate of antibiotic prescription, inappropriate use continues. For many drug retailers, antibiotic sales are an important source of revenue and a great financial incentive. For example, the prescription of antibiotics accounts for around 50% of all drugs prescribed by hospitals in China, compared with just 10% of hospitals in high-income countries. Is chicken costing $2 really worth human being extinction?
Thank you, Julia. And to wrap up, we will explore how governmental decisions plan to combat this crisis. Mr. McKimbey?
The UK government has made a 5-year plan. Firstly, healthcare professionals will get better education to strengthen their understanding of antibiotic resistance, in which rural colleges and deaneries will take a role in delivering undergraduate and postgraduate studies. Secondly, efficient funding will be allocated to these initiatives to help tackle the problem of antibacterial drug resistance. We will engage the general public so that this problem is not only dealt with from a scientific perspective but also from a social one. People have to understand that their short-term decisions will affect the antibacterial resistance in the long run.
Thank you so much for being here with us today and giving us hope that this problem may be resolved.